Teo, so if we spend more time on some of these, that's perfectly fine. So going back to last week, we started this conversation on respect and really brought up the word association with respect and disrespect. And so we played that game so that we could lay the foundation of respect, because a lot of what we said is that respect and also disrespect is one of those things that can vary from family to family, can vary from home to home, from culture to culture, from region to region. What you think is disrespectful, I might not find to be disrespectful. And so that can go a lot of different directions. So the one thing, I know I kind of forced this on you, but the one thing we kind of agreed on, everybody shook their head yes, so I assume we agreed, is that when it comes to respect and disrespect, although there's some confusion through actually defining it, what we would all say is that I know it when I see it, or I know it when I don't see it, or I know it when I hear it, I know it when I don't hear it, okay? And so then we kind of left off in this spot of posing this statement up here at the top. We talked through that all people deserve respect. And through our conversation, and again, I kind of forced it on you, but I think the best way to talk about this is that all people deserve to be valued. We may not necessarily say that all people deserve our respect, but certainly all people deserve to be valued. Now, let me stop right there and ask you, do you remember why we said that? Or what some of the answers were as to why that is true and should be true? There's one really obvious one.
Well, the one thing my husband didn't bring home last week, so.
What's that?
I said the why is the one thing my husband didn't bring
Oh,
home.
okay. All right. Well, so you're not at fault, Mary Lee.
We're all of God's children.
Okay, yeah, we're all of God's children, and as we look at the life of Jesus, that's exactly what he did. It didn't matter who it was, where he went, what was going on. There was a value to each and every person that was there. Sonny mentioned that. That's how he lived. That's what he did. So when it comes to a measuring stick for us as far as respect or value, whichever way you want to take that, obviously Jesus is that measuring stick. But like I started to go to James 3. This is I left off here, I think, and we read this in a hurry, and we started to discuss like how to do this, how to measure ourselves, and as you're turning there, I think it was Megan last week that brought up like the influence from the outside, most especially as it pertains to our kids. Like we started week one saying home should be a feeder for society, but is it true that society can be a feeder for the home and the things that are happening out there that can insert into the home? And we said yes, and Megan talked a lot about kids, right? And being friends and whatnot. So I started to think about the instances, like let's just go back 100 years or so. And I know you all aren't 100, but you know some history. Just think about this country, maybe. And I want you to think of some instances where this has not been the case, that all people deserve to be valued. And that in turn, over the last 100 years, in what ways do we marginalize people? Do we devalue them? How does that work, or how does that play out, not necessarily in your home, but out there?
Racial issues.
Okay, racial issues, still something that we battle with, we struggle with, it's all over the place. But I think the most important part of something like that is guess where it can stop? In our home, right? I mean, we can be a part of the change and changing that over, right? What else?
Citizenship.
Okay.
I mean, that's probably the current one, right?
Oh, yeah. Okay.
I mean, like if someone is a citizen or if they are an immigrant, there's
Okay.
sometimes different value placed on people.
Yeah, and so race can kind of play a role in that, right? I mean, we see people sometimes. I mean, after 9/11, what were your feelings about anyone that looked even a little bit off, right? Or a little bit similar to the guys responsible for flying those planes, right? I mean, that's an example. What else? Or how else?
Women's rights.
Okay, women's rights. It could be matters of opinion. We talked about that last week, right? It could be matters of opinion. It could be the way that you vote nowadays. We talked a little bit about that. Again, that was just an illustration, right? What about sexual behavior, sexual orientation? A big one here today. I mean, do we view those people with the same level of value that we do our people? And yet, like, I mean, while that can cause some feelings, that should be everything that we are. Hey, here's another big one that I've started to think about. I know this is a long passage, but not going to read through all of that. But one of them that pops up a lot here today, I think that's maybe a little more relatable to us, is in regards to someone's standing in society, right? The very idea that someone has more money or less money, it can work both ways, or they have more stuff or less stuff, or they're in this position or that position, can cause me to marginalize, to devalue, to overvalue, whichever way you want to take it, which is really not anything new. James chapter 2, verses 1 through 8 kind of deals with this as far as people walking into the assembly, and I give the rich man the good seat, but what do I do with the poor man?
Put them back.
I put him in the back, right? But again, that can kind of work both ways. And so I bring those up before we get into some hows, not to go down that street really hard, but this is the stuff that when it comes to my home, our homes, maybe that's where it needs to stop and that's where it needs to die, right? So with all the things that we'll forever be faced with in regards to how we value people, how we respect people, the question now is, how do I do it, right? What does it actually look like in my home? And the place that we started with, as far as how, is in James 3. And I didn't show you this slide, but like, yes, we can use Jesus as a measuring stick, but one of the first best places to start in regards to valuing people, respecting people, teaching our kids what that looks like in the home is by us watching our mouths. Because on one hand, our mouths are super beneficial in giving respect and showing respect and value to people. But on the flip side, what else can it do? Completely destroy it, right? So James chapter 3, beginning there in verse 2, let me read this again. For we all stumble in many ways. If anyone does not stumble in what he says, he's a perfect man. He's able to bridle the whole body as well. Now, if we put the bits into the horses' mouths so that they will obey us, we direct their entire body as well. Look at the ships also. Though they're so great and they're driven by strong winds, are still directed by a very small rudder wherever the inclination of the pilot desires. So also the tongue is a small part of the body, and yet it boasts of great things. See how great a forest is set aflame by such a small fire. We talked about last week, if there's no respect, if there's no value in the home, Chris mentioned what was going to happen. It's going to be destroyed. It's the same thing here. Verse 6, the tongue is a fire, the very world of iniquity. The tongue is set among our members as that which defiles the entire body and sets on fire the course of our life. It was set on fire by hell. For every species of beast and the birds, of reptiles and creatures of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by the human race. But no one can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil, full of deadly poison. With it, we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made, here it is, in the likeness of God. So really where we left off last week was me giving you guys the example. Like in my house, I'm usually up before everyone. By the time everybody wakes up, I've read, usually. I've tried to pray. But the minute everyone wakes up, what happens?
Chaos.
Huh?
Chaos.
Chaos. My tone changes, my words change, and it's not just in the home. The same can be said when we go to work, right? I don't know how many of you pray on the way to work. That's like your moment of silence and quiet. But the minute I get to work, something changes, right? And so, in regards to the mouth and what we say, this is a really it's a big one, and also kind of cool that James ties back into creation. Any comments there? I know we kind of touched on this one last week. Anything you want to add? And again, is that always just with our words, like the words that are coming out of my mouth? Sometimes it's just the tone, right? I can be saying something that's not disrespectful, and yet the tone kind of changes that. All right, so here's the next one. Chris, again, man, you were on fire last week, I guess. So we need to do it. We need to be the ones that are leading by example. And so this should remind you of the growth process that we talked about in week one. Like, if we're going to look at this thing inside of the home, where does it need to start? Where do I need to look first? Where do I need to look first?
With ourselves.
Yeah, with ourselves, right? I mean, we're so good at looking at this with everyone else, but oftentimes the real change is going to happen with me. So we just saw in James his criticism of Christians who give places of honor, lots of attention to the poor and not, or excuse me, the rich and not the poor. There was a word that Callie mentioned last week called common courtesy. I know you guys have heard that word. So what does it mean? Because oftentimes we'll use common courtesy, we'll use that phrase in an instance where you did something you shouldn't have done. And I say, come on, Drew, like it's only common courtesy that you do this, that, or the other. Well, what does common courtesy even mean?
It's like the baseline of respect that you give to everyone.
Okay, so the baseline of respect, what else could it be or might it be to you?
Considering other people's feelings in a situation.
Okay.
When you're doing something, consider others.
Yeah, so like, yeah, I like the word baseline and consideration of others. And yet, when you think about this word, I guess I want to like flip it back onto us. Because whenever we use that phrase, again, I use it with everyone else and I sling it around to everyone else. But the real question inside of the home and then even outside of the home is, am I living with a common courtesy? I pulled up a few verses. I love Romans 14, a really debatable chapter. We won't go down that road. But what's happening here in Romans 14 is Jews and Gentiles not getting along over scruples or matters of opinion. And what Paul writes to them here at the end is like, guys, listen, there's a common courtesy involved here. We pursue the things which make for peace and the building up of one another. That's common courtesy. You see it again in the next chapter. Accept one another just as Christ also accepted us to the glory of God. There's another one in chapter 12 that Paul writes in Romans. But then I also want to give you this one. And you can see how the last point kind of ties in. Speak evil of no one. Avoid quarreling. Be gentle. Show perfect courtesy towards all people. So, super important. So, unless you have comment on this right here, anybody comments as far as this? Again, Chris kind of touched on it.
It's so hard. I mean, it just is. I mean, my human nature is to complain, which I don't know, evil such a strong word, but at the same time, as soon as you said that in my heart, I knew that that's something that I need to work on with very specific people in my life. Like to back off a little bit, to be more gentle when I speak about them, to understand them a little bit better, and those kind of things. Not Chris.
Yeah, I was about to say, you.
Sorry, my brother reached over and patted my husband. He's not neglected as much as y'all think he is.
I got reading something.
But the courtesy towards all people, the common courtesy, I think I have that under control, but all of this first is definitely something that I need to work on.
Yeah, well, I think everyone in here would say the same. There are people in our lives where I know I have to work a little bit harder to do this a lot harder, sorry, than with others. And usually the way that works itself out is kind of as we talked about last week, like, you know, if you treat me with a level of respect and of value, then it's a whole lot easier to dish it out, right? But it's the ones that are constantly I think this applies to what Megan was talking about, teaching our kids, like, you don't have to be friends with everyone, but that's kind of what we say, right? But if they're being disrespected, then like, how do you work all that out? Well, they need to try, right? They need to try to continue to value that person. But again, can we just chalk it up as, yeah, that's super hard. Go ahead, Drew.
Yeah, you were talking a little bit ago about how like society leaks into the family or like leaks even into the body of Christ, right?
Yeah.
And I can't help but like look at this verse and think about like the political season we just went through, right?
Yeah.
And I think about both sides of the aisle. And when I read a verse that says, "Speak evil of no one, avoid quarreling, be gentle, and show perfect courtesy towards all people," I go, "Oh man, oof, that seems like that's a tough one in our country right now."
Yeah.
Right. And that is society leaking into our families. It is society leaking into our homes, and it is. I don't know a lot of times any better in the church than it is outside of the church.
Yes.
Kind of an indictment on us.
Yeah.
We've got to do that.
Yeah, we gotta do the opposite of
Yeah.
everything that we see out there, right? And that's definitely a big one. Part of that I used as an illustration last week, right? Sonny?
And I was just gonna say, I mean, the teachers in the room already feel this on a daily basis, but never before, I think, in our country, when you're talking about the history, used to 100 years ago, everybody had a mom and dad at home, mom stayed home, dad went to work. Like everybody's lives pretty much look the same. But we are now in a place where people have come from all places, all backgrounds, and never before have we needed to be so conscious of where somebody came from.
That's right.
It just has to be like something we think about all the time. I had an interaction with a kid in the hallway on the last day we were at school, and like he immediately just got defensive and started talking. I was like, dude, I was just asking you, where is your pass?
Yeah.
If you have a pass in your pocket, could you just pull it out and show me, and I'll leave you alone. But like he automatically, it just went up. And so like we just have to be so conscious, because we are truly a melting pot now of not just people's, but life, you know.
Well, and that kind of brings up a good point. I think maybe a lot of what we see in the schools, I know, well, if you're in schools, you know, or have said this before, that when it comes to a kid's behavior, a kid acting out, if I know that kid, I tell others, like, you don't know the backstory. You don't know all that's actually behind what's moving or driving that behavior. So yeah, very important in this regard, for us to kind of know the backstory a little bit before we jump into this place where we're judging and devaluing right from the get-go without zero knowledge, right, Merely?
Well, and valuing doesn't mean that you have to agree or let something slide.
Yeah.
But disagreeing with somebody and standing up for what's right needs to be done in the certain type of love that I think is what Jesus shared. Like he didn't let the Pharisees just get away with everything.
Right.
He didn't let people just, use him as a doormat sometimes. But he did it in the proper way that showed love to all people.
Yeah.
So you can disagree, but you don't have to be mean about it.
Right. Yeah. Again, super hard.
Yeah.
All right, I think really as far as reflection, I've been continuing to try to pour these into, our thinking here. But when it comes to you, how are you doing here? We want to be valued. We want to feel respected. I want to be shown some common courtesy. But on the flip side of all of that is, how am I doing with that? Am I the person that's actually valuing people, showing that common courtesy? Last piece here, and then we'll move on to the next lesson. is to let it be in the home. And I guess what I mean by that is really more so probably, I guess, for you guys that are married. Like how important is it that my kids see me respect and value my wife and hold her in the highest place? I mean, it's massive, right? And so if the only respect that my kids know or that they respect me just because I'm their dad, then that's not a great teacher of things, right? Like we have to actually show this. And I started to think 2 weeks ago, if you guys remember, Eric brought up this pyramid. And so I went home and was trying to find this pyramid, and I knew what he was talking about, but couldn't attach it. If you like went to school for education, you saw this many times, probably every semester. But what's really interesting here is that this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs for a kid to reach their fullest potential. And so, if this is our job in bringing them up in the discipline and the instruction of the Lord and training up our children, well, I mean, we're not going to really talk about these basic needs, but we already talked about this one, the safety inside of the home. But then look up there in the orange where you see that word respect that we're talking about. And what is the link between a safe home and teaching respect? Like, what are the words you see in there that are important to what we're talking about? Right? Like, I mean, there's got to be some love, which we'll talk about in 2 weeks. Like, it's super important that we are the people that are actually showing them what it looks like through treating the person closest to us with the most amount of respect. Does that make sense? I hope I said that right. Sounded weird in my head. Any comments here on this one? Good job, Eric. Thank you for the illustration. All right, so let me stop right there. Any other ways we can show respect, or any other things you want to talk about as far as this guideline or this? Shall we move on? Go ahead,
If
Sonny.
no one's ever heard this before, and I'm sorry if you have, but our dad grew up telling us that he chose my mom. He didn't choose any of us. That's what he said. He said, she's the only one I got to handpick. The Lord brought all y'all, but like I handpicked her. And I don't know. I mean, it was brought up all the time. I handpicked her.
Telling me I'm a
You
mistake.
can't treat her this way. You can't, act that way. And I mean, that was what he taught all the time. And there is nothing that makes me feel more love and belonging and all the things when my husband does that same defense of me
Yeah.
in front of these two.
Yeah.
But when a husband or a wife stands in and shows that respect, like maybe I don't even like what he just said, or you don't like what he just said, but he is your dad, and I love him.
Knock you out.
And he will knock you out,
I don't
but
know, Rick, can you still take it? Just give it a go, clear the aisle.
Davis wants to so bad.
No,
I don't know. I just think that's at the base of if the husband and wife don't respect and love each other like that, there's no way. Because I think that leaked down to all of us then. Because if mom and dad love each other and respect each other like that, because that's not even really talking love, that's really respect. Then I just think it leaks down to everybody else. And now there's this whole level of respect for each other.
Well,
This pyramid is not just for children.
yeah.
I mean, you have to have this for
Sure.
yourself. and
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I think, let me make mention of this because it's the reality for some of us in here that, what Sonny is talking about is so much harder in a blended family. I found out very quick how hard it was to teach my daughters to show respect for Megan. And the best way to do that I found was not even necessarily like through my words, really, but really just having her back. Like whether I agreed or disagreed with whatever she was gonna do, I needed to have her back and they needed to see me continue to do that and understand that no matter what they're, doing, like, I'm siding with this person. This is my person and I didn't really choose them, right? Although I did. That's
Yeah.
kind of mean
Yeah.
to say.
It is,
I can't believe
but-
you said that about me. It's so messed
Maybe
up.
he never said we weren't chosen.
No, I'm not really surprised. He probably called us some other words.
I don't
in the
think he said
process.
we weren't chosen. He just always made it very clear that she was the only one he chose. His words, I handpicked her.
All right, anything else with respect that we want to talk about? Okay, so let's go to the next one. Again, remember, we're just trying to plug through all of these, and so the next one up is we tell the truth. And I think the best way to tackle this is really just from the foundation that, like, I hope we don't need a whole lot of convincing that telling the truth is what we should be about. I'm not going to try to beat you over the head with scripture, although some of that will come up. I think that this is one of those, unlike with respect last week, that we can pretty well define and we can say that there's a pretty clear right and a very clear wrong. So in most cases, though, I think this one's super interesting because I brought this up several times over the years. I heard it put this way, that when it comes to you and when it comes to your sin or someone else's sin or their mistakes, I cast a really big lens on that. I magnify it and I make it a big deal. But when it comes to my own sin and my own fault and my own shortcoming, I really minimize that. But what if we look at this from the standpoint of, I mean, well, first off, has everyone in here lied? Okay, just making sure. Like, there are certain things that we're all engaged in, and we all do, right? And so, how do we view those things? And I can't help but to think that when it comes to those kind of things that are very common amongst all of us, maybe it's lying, that maybe we like undermine how dangerous it can actually be, if that makes sense. And so I hope that maybe you see from the get-go that something that's engaged in by the majority can sometimes be viewed as okay, right? And I think that lying is one of those things. Not telling the truth is one of those things. Like if everyone else is doing it, and we're all sitting here saying we all do it, then doesn't that make it kind of okay? Now, again, I'm not going to beat you upside the head, but like we can go all the way back to the Ten Commandments, all the way back into Exodus to realize and to know that God holds lying in a very serious matter. And so that's why I put that one up there. But before we move forward, I do think it's important to have a little bit of a disclaimer around this one. Okay? Because there's two extremes. The one we're talking about here today is lying from the standpoint of a situation where I need to tell the truth, right? This one right here is a little scary because if I'm just fully transparent about everything and I tell the truth about everything, then can you see or maybe pick some instances where that's not good? Chris is shaking his head. Yeah. So what are those instances? I mean, real quick, give me a scenario where it should not require my full transparency in telling the truth.
Hey, Chris, do I look fat in this?
I didn't write that one down. Yeah.
Better
Yeah.
at least be kind about it.
Yeah. Hillary?
Questions that our kids ask.
Yeah.
They're not ready for the full answer.
Good. Yeah, that. Yeah, so I just wrote down age appropriateness, right? Like, I mean, again, back to, I guess, my family, like my girls have asked some questions along the way that they just weren't ready for yet and still aren't. And I am not under the impression that being fully transparent with them about that and telling them the truth, the whole truth on that is actually going to be good for them. Right? And so in the same way, I couldn't help but to think like we kind of teach our kids the same thing, and we teach them this line between like you need to tell the truth and you cannot lie, but also there are some instances where lying is okay and it is the right thing to do, right? And so they should kind of know that. So I just want to make that disclaimer here because yes, there are some scenarios where like, I don't know, maybe it's in the case of Megan asking me, how do I look? That, no, she always looks good. How's that?
And where's
Glad that one's on tape too.
Santa falling tall?
Hmm. No comment?
I just wouldn't lie. How many times did I just lie to my kids in the last?
Well,
Yeah, speaking of relevancy.
are y'all looking at me to answer?
There's such a thing as over-informing, right?
Yeah.
And there's a danger in over-informing.
Yeah.
Just like you said, there are questions that like we get from our kids that like, I can over-inform them at an age where they're not ready for the answer. They're not gonna be able to understand, to discern, to piece together. They don't have the lived life experience yet to understand, hey, this is why that happened. Or this is some of the effects of why that happened. They just don't, they can't grasp it. And if they can't grasp it, over-informing it can do as much damage as anything else can. Maybe
Well, I think what's also really important in this is that, you know, I can remember being really challenged by some questions that I was asked. I mean, I'm gonna say 5, 6 years old-ish, with my two. And what I've tried to keep in the back of my mind is that the door is still open for them and wondering what the answer to that question is. And at some point in time, we need to be mindful of maybe those questions they asked, they weren't ready to have an answer to yet, but I need to come back around to that at some point in time and at least kind of like feed that question answer piece. Really?
So we teach gifted elementary students,
Mhm.
and naturally, they understand conceptually more than they probably should emotionally. Their emotionality is not ready, their maturity is not there to understand the concept of different things. But we have a lot of parents that don't understand that. So like I had a first grader coming in and trying to tell all of his peers about LGBTQ community, trans community, and these kids are completely baffled by what he's saying because that's never been addressed in their home at all. And so I try to think about it from that side. Are they mature enough to hold this information and only share it when acceptable or with people that are also ready to hear it?
Yeah.
And then if they're not, then you don't. Because just because somebody can understand it on a certain level doesn't mean they're ready to have the information.
Yeah, very good. Rick, were you about to say something?
I was just gonna kind of preface, delaying the answer like you were talking about. You kind of gotta weigh that though, because depending on the inquisitivity of the child, you don't want them going elsewhere to try to find an answer as well. So you have to measure that.
Yeah,
I'm
that's,
thinking of a particular instance with Davis when he was growing up.
okay.
And I just felt like I weighed it and I was like, I want to go ahead and tell him this because
Right.
he may go somewhere else.
Yeah, well, yeah, so some of those things, I don't know, you ones that have kids around, I'm not telling you what to do or how to do it, but like right around that middle school age where, I felt like as I drew back on my experience, that was where I was exposed to the most and had the least amount of answers to. And so Megan and I really tried to, like, for us to be the ones that were going to expose them to the words, the language, what you're about to hear, what you're walking into, all those things, rather than delay that. And I think that before I get to Hillary and then Richard, okay. I really think that our generation of parenting is doing a much better job at that than maybe our parents did. I remember wondering some things, but never feeling fully confident in going to my parents and asking them or talking to them about it. Some of that will get brought up in this lesson, but like, I think we're doing a good job in like turning the tide on our kids being informed by us, not by someone else on the outside. If you can remember what you
Yeah,
said.
no.
Okay.
And what I think is really awesome about a church family is that I know the instance that Rick's talking about. Because Sunny has been I don't mean to embarrass them, but has been a mentor to me, like an older sister that I didn't have.
Yeah.
And that particular situation always impressed me that they handled the hard conversation
Yeah.
when they were faced with it head on, when
Sure.
so many parents wouldn't, out of thinking they're doing maybe the right thing,
Yeah.
or just not wanting to have the awkward conversation that was gonna come.
But
But I appreciated that from a younger person's standpoint, and now I can look back and think, I didn't do that.
yeah, that's one of the great benefits of what we have right here. I mean, I can't tell you how many times, I mean, I think of Miss Mo, and Pat, really, who like, I mean, I needed someone to feed me some stuff, right? And so, I mean, that's what we have here. So don't ever, I don't know, I guess don't ever feel ashamed in going to someone that's in here that has probably been through what you're going through and get what you need there. So let me go back to our feelings again about lying. I really want to try to magnify this. Okay? Based on what we've talked about so far, would you say, or what would you say to this question up here on the screen? Lying is the worst sin that we commit. And what I mean by we is we in here. We as Christians. Which direction would you like to take that question?
It's the root of the most painful sins that we commit.
Okay?
I don't know if it itself is the worst, but it is the root of the most painful ones, I feel like, that we commit.
Okay,
Has
painful.
the most consequences.
Okay.
Like, because of the amount of times it's said in the Bible of what your mouth can do,
Yes.
through gossip and through other things, like how it creates and can burn us.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yeah, it can start a flame, right? Yeah, anybody else?
The easiest trap to fall into.
Okay.
It's not hard to lie.
Yeah. Yeah, super easy to just like out with it and do it. I started to think like, I mean, for us, I mean, unless I'm way off here, there's no one in here that like has the intentions of going out and murdering someone. There's no one in here, Drew. Okay.
No, I think that's true.
Yeah, there's no one in here, I mean, again, unless I'm way off, that has the intentions of going out and cheating on their spouse. There's no one in here that has the, like, so some of these things that we think of as so very serious, we don't engage in anyways, nor do we even like think about it. Now, I don't mean to undermine those. They're pretty extreme, right? But at the same time, I started to think like in most cases, lying is put right there into the same category of stealing, of an affair, of murder. And yet, like we can kind of get fooled because we also see the way God dealt with some of those bigger things. And maybe the consequence of that doesn't match what this is. And so I'm kind of, I guess, along the lines of what Drew said, the pain that stems from it. Like, anyone know that from experience? Like, how many people does it hurt when I lie? Is it just my wife when I lie to her? No, because that's going to have an effect on the things we talked about before. And then it's going to break down into the household. Oftentimes, we think it's really not going to be a big deal, but then it snowballs into all these other things, and we kind of find a way to justify it, I guess. As it snowballs and it gets worse and worse. You guys, most of you know I'm a big Seinfeld fan. Still watch it sometimes. But there's an episode where Jerry is about to get put on a polygraph test. He has lied about a show that he watched with this girl that he's dating. And so he's talking to his buddy George, who's a habitual liar. Like that's his character in the show. Like that's all he does. And as Jerry's walking out the door to go take this polygraph test, George tells him, "Hey Jerry, remember, it's not a lie if you believe that it's true." And I think about that because that's where, as easy as it may be for us to just lie, it snowballs into this place where all of a sudden the father of lies has deceived us into thinking our lie is hidden by what we think is all of a sudden the truth. Like it gets so convoluted and so jacked up and so messed up. So that can be where this goes. Now, again, I don't think that this is the worst by way of what we see and how we see God deal with people, most especially in the Old Testament. But like, let's not be fooled. As we look at Scripture, what we see is that the Lord hates it. He hates haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that kill the innocent, a heart that plots evil, feet that race to do wrong. Like, again, we would look at those and say, okay, those are so extreme. But here again, it's clumped right in. You go to the very end of our Bibles in Revelation 21. And who are the people that are going to spend eternity with the father of lies, but those that are liars? And that seems so very appropriate. I just don't think that we think about it in those terms. So with like 1 minute left, I'm going to stop there. Next week, we're going to talk about, really how, as far as telling the truth, most especially with our kids. I don't know if you know this, but that's super challenging to teach them how to tell the truth and some of the words that go into that. Any other closing comments? Anything you want to add? What?
So this just messes me up mentally, so.
Okay,
yeah,
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I'm sorry. How so?
Because are all lies a lie? Are we allowed to tell some? Like, this is just, back and forth constant.
We already answered that.
Not really.
Yeah. Well, if you're Jim Carrey, you have to lie, right? So, all right, we good? Anything else? I hate to mess you up. Hey, I guess one more thing. I hope, again, because I didn't say this at the beginning, that nothing, like, we're all just trying to get better, okay? So, like, I hope nothing is coming from the standpoint that I got it figured out or my house is perfect. We're just trying to get better and do better and be better, all right? Thank you guys. Don't forget to pick up one of those books and sign up for small group.